Hey guys, and thank you for joining me for another episode of Life by Design. Did you know that your date, time, and location of birth can all have an impact on who you are and how you show up in the world? It can affect things such as your relationships, your career choices. It can also affect the way that you take on information and you learn and put it back out there into the world. This concept is known as human design, and today I have the opportunity to speak with Caroline Southwell, who is a transformational coach for entrepreneurial women out here in Bali. So enjoy. If I could ask you to kind of sum up your story in a nutshell, what brought you here to this point that we are now?
Well, probably up to this point is very much about like how did I get to Bali? That's a big part of it, and it was interesting. I spent my 20s actually traveling Australia, and I would get an impulse that it was time to do something different. Like when it was time to leave the family home, instead of just going to the local uni, I went to one 700 kilometres away. Then when uni finished up, I took a job in Central Australia and flew about 2,000 kilometres away, where I didn't know anybody, and worked in the Australian desert. And so I had somehow set this pattern quite early on of like going somewhere new, without really knowing a lot of what I was getting myself in for, but it just kind of felt like an adventure, and something inside of me said, yeah, go do that. And so really, I'd done that in my 20s, and then in my early 30s, I realised that this whole day job thing really wasn't for me. This whole working full-time thing really wasn't for me. And I was like, well, I have to make a living somehow. How do I do that? And so I kind of fell into the world of entrepreneurship, of being a business owner, and have been stumbling forward on that ever since. As I think pretty much anybody does. I don't think anybody just kind of goes, occasionally, small number of people like really entrepreneurial as kids, and they just kind of figure it out. They're wired for it. I think the rest of us just kind of stumble into it somewhere along the way. And so I got to a point in October of 2000 and, what are we in now, 16, 15, 2014, where I was sitting in a gorgeous apartment overlooking the harbour in Sydney. And I was house sitting for someone, and she had an astrology magazine sitting on her table. And I'm like, I'm kind of 1 foot in, 1 foot out. I'm like, oh yeah, there might be something in there. And as I opened it up and had a read through, it talked about the whole of 2014 and what it is for a star sign Gemini like myself. And it said from middle of December to middle of January, it's time to, it's a good time for travel. And so that started this little seed in my head. I was like, this little spark. And I was like, well, that's the ideal time to be house sitting, because everyone else is going on holidays. Everyone else is on vacation. That's when you house sit. But that was the logical answer. The seed had been planted and I was excited. So I had this growing sense that my chapter in Australia had been, my time in Sydney was done. So even though all my family are, my close family are still in Sydney, I just had this feeling that it was time to start doing what I'd done in my 20s of travelling around Australia and do it around the world instead. And so I just kind of had this back and forth, I say it was this back and forth conversation with my intuition. I was like, okay, well, if I'm leaving Sydney, where am I going? The response I got was Asia. I'm like, Asia's a really big place. Can we nail it down, narrow it down a little bit? And I had this back and forth conversation with myself for about, I don't know, maybe a month. And eventually what came up was Bali. And I immediately dismissed it because as an Australian, the pictures that I'd seen in the media of Bali were drunk Australians in Kuta being hassled by locals and hassling locals. And I was like, nope, don't want to borrow it. But this voice kept insisting. Every time I would let Bali go, it would come to the fore again. And usually I go with a rule of 3. If I hear about a person or a book or a place 3 times in a short period of time, I pay attention.
That's
I got it. I got Bali, a hit of Bali, 8 times in 3 weeks. I'm like, okay, I'm going.
Get the sign.
I got it. All right, I'm listening. All right. And so I yeah, so I booked a plane ticket. And then people said to me, oh, cool, you're going to Bali, so where on Bali are you going? And I'm like, well, Bali's a really tiny island. I'm just going to Bali. And they're like, oh, no, you're going to have to pick a place. I'm like, oh, really? And so in the conversations I had with people who knew me quite well and had been to Bali, they said, I think you'll really like Ubud. And so I thought, okay, cool. Well, I'll go there and I'll start by going there and suss it out. 15 months later,
Wow.
I've only left the country to do visa runs. And as you do,
Yes.
if you're in Bali, and otherwise I've barely left Ubud because it's just my little spot at the moment, and the transformation here is massive, as you can probably appreciate. And so basically, that's the kind of long version of how I got to here, from a location and intuition kind of answer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And did you have moments at which you felt like this is really hard?
Oh God, yeah. Like this morning.
Okay, right.
Right? It's like
This is real, people.
it's like, yes, it's beautiful. Like right now we're sitting in this beautiful location and I can see frangipani trees and I can see like beautiful architecture and blue sky, and like we're in rainy season. So it's like when I put this in my calendar, I knew that we might have to like switch location or switch time because it might be pouring rain, right? But we have blue sky and some fluffy clouds, and that pouring rain will probably come in about 4 hours.
Mm-hmm.
But it's gorgeous, right? And there's also times when it's like it's really hard. Like it's still, yes, it's paradise. Yes, parts of it are totally beautiful. But it's still life. Like it still has its challenges. I still have times when I go, is this where I thought I'd be at 34? Have I done the things that I wanted to do? You know, I'll get to the end of a day and I go, did I get the important things done for today? Did I grow my business? Did I have, you know, meaningful conversations with people who I want to connect with? So, yeah, so absolutely there's hard times. It's just life. It's just life with a different view.
Absolutely. I think sometimes there's this misconception that coaches have it sorted. They know how to get through every bump in the road, and you know, it's kind of a bit easier for them maybe than the rest of us. But it's not, because you're a human being. You're living life day to day, and you're figuring it out. Do you have any strategies or any days like today where you might have found it a bit difficult? Do you have any sort of mantras that you say to yourself, or any kind of tools that bring you back to center?
Yeah, lots of tools. And actually, if we I'd love to come back to that, coaches having it all figured out. So maybe we'll come back to that one if we can, because I've got some important things to share on that if we can. But to answer your question, do I have any tools for when I hit a hard place? Well, actually, I have a lot of tools, and what helps me to what probably does make it easier for me than other people is that I have become very, very good at pulling myself out of a difficult place quite quickly. So I've become very resilient, because when I hit a low, I very rarely indulge in staying in there, and I do have lots of things to pull me back out again. Anything that helps us get present, Artie, is really going to help, because really the funk, the depression, the anxiety, the worry, the fear, none of that's in the present moment. The only thing that's in the present moment is like right now, like this breath, this thought, like this very moment. And if you're completely in the present moment, all of the other stuff falls away. But, in Australia, in the UK, in the US, in a lot of these more Western cultures, we haven't really been taught very well how to just be present. We spend a lot of time worrying about what happened in the past and where I think I should be at 34 or whatever, right? And we spend a lot of time anxious or fearing the future. But the past only exists in our memory. Like, point to me where yesterday is.
So true.
right?
Yeah.
And like, point to me where tomorrow is,
Mm.
because it only exists in our imagination. So we have these beautiful things of memory and imagination, but if they're not serving us, like if we're not using those tools well, they're going to trip us up. Like if we use our memory to keep replaying things that didn't work, that didn't go our way, that were less than ideal, etc., then that's what we keep bringing in the present moment. And if we're imagining the worst, we're not using that tool well either. So I feel like the very first thing starts with being as present as possible. And so when I catch myself in a funk, it's like anything I can do to get back in my body and be present again is always going to help pull me out of that memory or that imagination that I'm using to torture myself.
Yeah.
You know, so it could be, I mean, Ubud is very big on yoga. So it could be yoga, it could be meditation. You know, I did a session with my movement coach this morning. So, you know, it could be as simple as me learning exactly the right technique to do tricep push-ups. And it's like right in that moment while I'm listening to my coach and I'm understanding how to move my body exactly, there's no room for anxiety or worry or fear. All I'm doing is paying total attention to whether or not my elbows are tucked in, and is my core engaged, and am I doing this movement correctly by paying 100% attention to my body. You know, it's the mind that's going to beat us up. Our own mind that we use to beat ourselves up.
Yes.
Nobody else is doing it to us.
It sounds crazy when you think about it. It sounds crazy that, we almost, we turn ourselves into our own worst enemy, don't we? Which is crazy.